This video was sponsored by Raycon. Where's that flashlight? Oh, here we go. Okay, so I've been hiding in here for a while now. Maybe those alternate Arlos will just get bored and leave. It's a good thing I've got my Raycon Everyday E25s here with me. They're so sleek and comfortable that I never get tired of having them in. They can last up to 6 hours on a charge, and with this convenient little charging case, I can hide in this dark room listening to music for up to 24 hours. In stressful situations like these, having such comfy, reliable, high-quality earbuds legitimately helps calm me down. Been hitting the Enya pretty hard. Got some taiko in there too, that's pretty nice. Some piano music.
This is Sparlow. Where are you? Hey, where's the mustard?
I told you, it's in the cabinet. Come on, guys, give me some space here. Oh man, how am I gonna keep feeding all these Arlos? And what about Christmas presents? I'll go broke. Wait a minute. The Raycon Everyday E25s offer the quality of other premium wireless earbuds at about half the price. And for a limited time, I can get 20% off by heading to buyraycon.com/Arlo. I dare say they would make terrific Christmas presents.
In my universe, we only give each other toothpaste for Christmas.
You're getting Raycons and you're gonna like them.
We call Christmas flam jork. Can I come in?
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows?
Hey, I'm not seeing the mustard.
Move over. Hello, my wonderful friends. I am so glad that you're here joining me today. Right now, I've got something of just kind of an off-the-cuff, unscripted kind of discussion, just about something that's been on my mind recently. It's not something I want to delve super deep into with a big, scripted video or whatever. Just kind of something that I have been tossing around the old noggin recently. So naturally, I'm very excited about Age of Calamity, as I've been saying again and again and again. I think it's super great. Played the demo, super great. Can't wait to play the full thing. And of course, the initial announcement trailer was very cool, got me very hyped, but there was one element of that trailer that, sort of worried me. And I guess it wasn't even the trailer, it was the announcement itself. When Eiji Aonuma came on to introduce the game, he also mentioned how, they're hard at work on the sequel to Breath of the Wild. But listen to what he says about the sequel.
Regarding the sequel, in order to make the vast world you enjoyed exploring in the original game even more impressive, the team is working hard on its development, so you'll have to wait a bit longer before we can provide more updates.
So when they first announced that Breath of the Wild was getting a sequel, I think pretty much immediately a big topic of discussion was, is it going to be a completely new world, or are they going to try to reuse what they have, the Hyrule they've already got? Because the world is just so big that if you're going to give us another world, it needs to be like pretty much at least as big, but then you're going to have to transplant the characters into a completely new place and remove them from the old plot almost entirely. Or if you want to use the same characters and plot and everything, if it's going to take place in the same Hyrule, are you going to just use the same world? How exactly does that work? And the idea of them using the same map, like the same just basic map and geography and everything, it was a little worrisome to me. I have not been a fan of that idea, but obviously it was all purely speculation up to that point. But hearing what Aonuma said, technically this could all come down to just specific wording. It could come down to translation for all I know. There's no actual way to know specifically what this is communicating. But as it is, in its current form, the way that it was given to me and the way it hit my ears and was processed to my brain, what he is saying tells me it's the same world. He says we're focusing on making the world you explored even more impressive. Like basically using the same Hyrule that we already had. So like very obviously, they're not gonna use the literal exact copy, paste, everything is identical, all the same shrines and Koroks and everything. Like no, that's not gonna happen. But if they do use the same world, I guess it worries me, because it's hard for me to imagine that working. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things where like I'm looking at it from every angle and I'm trying to imagine a scenario where that isn't disappointing to me, at least on some level. I mean, and there are lots of ways that they could do this. Obviously, if you watched my review, you'll know that I thought it was a very flawed game. I love Breath of the Wild to pieces. but there's a ton of room for improvement. So, I mean, if they're gonna reuse the world and just make drastic improvements to the gameplay and add in more stuff, like, that's cool. I do like the idea of that, but I feel like it's gonna feel like, if it's not substantial enough, it's going to end up feeling like DLC. And that's one of my main problems here, is it almost doesn't matter what they do to the world. Say, you know, new Koroks, new set of shrines, or whatever, new quests, new story. Overall, I don't want it to end up just feeling like DLC, because if they were going to do like the quick like asset reusing Majora's Mask sequel thing where it was just a couple years later, I might have been more okay with the idea of them reusing Hyrule. But at this point, it's gonna be like another 5-year gap between titles. Like, just like look at Age of Calamity. It's probably like next November at the earliest is probably when they're gonna give us Breath of the Wild 2, and that's almost 5 years again. So all of that build up just to get the same Hyrule again, I feel like it's gonna be a bit of a letdown. Because, like, you know, like the obvious changes, like I said, new Koroks, new shrines, new dungeons of some type. But like, there's a couple problems with that. Even just on a narrative level, how do you explain all of that? Why are all of the old shrines gone and the new shrines are just randomly here? Why? The more they change about the original world, the more kind of confusing it's gonna be on a narrative level. Why is it all just the same thing, but different again? And then there's the frustration where, like, from what they've told us about the development of Breath of the Wild, they spent years just getting the mechanics down, just getting the physics and the way the world works and all of the Sheikah Slate runes and stuff. And then after that, building the world itself only took a couple years. So that's where it's like, okay, so you had the groundwork this time from day one. Obviously, they're probably going to bring in some more new elements or whatever. But like, why would they not build a new world? If it only took them a few years, why would they not give us something new to work with? And that's not to say there won't be some sort of new substantial thing. There are a lot of theories going around. You know, like it could, Hyrule Castle, like rising up or whatever is happening in the trailer. There could be like a big underground system. You know, it could be like there's Hyrule on the top and then second Hyrule underneath, and it's a big underground thing, and that's a possibility. Or it could be like Dark World. You know, we've seen that in Zelda a lot of times. It could be the same world but the dark version, or you switch back and forth between the dark version. Those are probably like the two most likely outcomes, especially because they said this is going to be a scarier game, you know, kind of in line with Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess. Can be a little bit darker, so that would, you know, that supports the idea of a dark world or an underground sort of thing. But then again, like, that just leads to more problems. That's just a lot of dark, like, thematically, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how much of the game I do want to spend exploring this massive dark world, or if it's like, even if like the dark version of the world or the underground one is like the new one, but then you still have the old one, what is the old one doing to keep you interested and not just feel samey? Because like, here's the biggest point I want to make here, is that exploring the world as it is in Breath of the Wild was my favorite part of the game. That was the absolute best part, was just having a big giant world and going and not knowing what to expect. And again, they can sort of change what is in the world to a point, but no matter what they do, it's gonna feel samey. I'm gonna know the basic geography. I know where the mountains are, you know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm just not as good at creating this stuff as they are, but I cannot imagine a scenario where I am exploring and that magical edge isn't just kind of gone. You know what I mean? It's too familiar. And like, the world itself is so big that it's like, it's hard for me to imagine them adding that much more to it. If anything, just like, how are they gonna fit it in the cartridge? You know what I mean? Like, maybe there's a neighboring kingdom and you get to like kind of branch out into the kingdom. You know, maybe you've got the map of Hyrule and then splotches up on the edges. You get to like go just these little sections that weren't there before. But like, anything that you do to expand the map is just like, it's almost unnecessary unless you're making what you already had really, really substantial, and I don't know how you're gonna do that. Then like, how much more can you add? How much more can you realistically add on top of that before even the player is kind of overwhelmed with just how massive this world is? And if you make the new areas like super interesting and new, again, how do you make the old one not just seem old when it's miles and miles and miles and miles across? How does that work? How can you be exploring the old world and not feeling old vibes from it? How can you still surprise the player? I guess the only way I can imagine it working is if it's like, it's so different. Like, not even just like new Shrines and New Koroks. It would have to be like a new system of things. You know what I mean? It would have to be like 10 alien spaceships came down and those are the new dungeons, and they completely warped the areas around them, or like, it just, something new has to come in and inject something so totally different that even though the geography is the same, every like interaction you have is different, or there's like a new traversal mechanic or something. In my review, I talked about the idea of like roving bosses and like sequences where you're on horseback and like chasing someone down. Like that's the kind of stuff that could be pretty cool. That could make it feel a little bit fresh if you introduce a lot of like new creatures and monsters and bad guy types that really just sort of the way that they move across the landscape. Like that needs to be taken to a much greater scale. Like that could potentially work. Sort of like how in Pokemon Gold and Silver, you have like the main game, and then they fit Kanto like in the post game. You can go back to the entire region of the first set of games, but they're not as dense. It's not really an entire second game. It's a little bit simpler. There aren't as many trainers and things to do. Some stuff is kind of blocked off. It could be like that. It could be sort of where whatever new thing, whether it's underground or, you know, a neighboring kingdom or whatever, maybe that is like the real meat of it. And then the original geography is mostly just a little bit more empty. It's mostly used for big modes of traversal or big boss fights or something. It's not quite as dense because it's not supposed to be, you know what I mean? But I could go on and on, sort of brainstorming this stuff all day. The ultimate point I'm trying to make is I'm just having a hard time with it. I'm having a hard time imagining a scenario where Breath of the Wild 2 uses the same Hyrule and it's not disappointing to at least some degree. And of course, like I have to say, don't get me wrong, so excited for Breath of the Wild 2. It's my #1 highest anticipated game right now by a wide margin, mostly because we don't really know a lot of games. Okay, no, never mind. Metroid Prime 4 is technically above that, but it's definitely one of them. Like, it's gonna be great, and refining the gameplay, like the gameplay loop, I feel that that's probably the most important thing. Out of anything, introducing a proper crafting system, or just making a better progression system, to me, that's my #1. That's my #1 wish right there. The world stuff is kind of secondary, but it is still important to me. Even if it ends up being a little disappointing, then that doesn't mean the game won't still be great. You know, in my review, I'll be like, it's a little disappointing that such and such, but it's still really great for all these other reasons. Who knows? I'm not trying to be super pessimistic about it or anything. Again, this is just kind of a casual discussion video. This is just kind of what I've been thinking. It's hard for me to imagine a reused Breath of the Wild world that works on every level and doesn't remove a little bit of that magic edge. Because Breath of the Wild is a good game all by itself, but that magical edge, that feeling of pressing out into the world, that's something that can only happen the first time. That can only happen the first time exploring that specific world, and that's not something that is going to be replicated again, not even in future playthroughs of Breath of the Wild. That was a one-time thing. And so I want to recapture that in Breath of the Wild 2. I want to have that same magical feeling again when I explore whatever new world it presents me, because that was so much of the enjoyment. So much of my enjoyment of Breath of the Wild was that first time. And that magical first time isn't something that happens a lot for me in games these days. Just the older I get, it's so infrequent now. So of course, I'm gonna be hoping that Breath of the Wild 2 does the same thing. Maybe that's not even realistic. Maybe I shouldn't be chasing after such a fleeting feeling. Maybe I should be focusing more on mechanics and all that stuff. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking. Ultimately, we just have to wait and see. Hopefully sometime next year, assuming the production of Breath of the Wild 2 didn't get delayed too much, hopefully next year we'll start to actually see some substantial stuff. I'm hoping for a November 2021 release date. Would be really, really nice. But let me know what you think about all this down in the comments. Does this concern you? Would it also be kind of disappointing if they reuse the same world? Do you really not care at all, as long as they focus in on those, you know, the new story? Like, I didn't even mention the story, but if the story's great, it almost doesn't even matter what they do. Use the same world. If you give us a cool, dark, twisty, cool story, I will probably just eat it up anyway. But let me know what you think, and also, please have a wonderful day. I love you. Goodbye.